Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you, Matt. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you for coming. I think we're just going to wait a few more minutes. I know it's lunchtime, but it does take a while, I think, for people to show up. So, why don't you tell me where you're from? Which part of the world are you from? Can you throw that in the chat? Oh, cool. We're getting more people. Oh, hi, Flavia. Hello. Hello, Matt Sullivan. Well, I want to thank you guys for showing up to our second Investment Friday talk. Um, just so you know, Investment Friday talks, they are. Hi, Anna. It's good to see you. Um, Today, we're just going to talk about some CVs and portfolio stuff. It's been something I've been working on for the past year. In fact, if I don't mind giving a shout out to Miss Yana, I've been getting to know her and working with her on that. But what I want to say is that Investment Friday talks. It's just it's actually just something that I think a lot of companies do. At least it started, I think, with Google back in the day. But it is taking some time on Friday after that long week to spend an hour or two investing in your education, in your welfare. And you don't, and it's anything you can do, really. It's not really about just reading or learning, but it is very much about um, investing in yourself, in your professional self. And at the last company I was at, what we used to tell each other, if it was good for you, the community, and the world, then it was worth your investment time. And it was something that we took advantage of sometimes. Not all of us did. Sometimes we just had to work, but it was definitely something I took with me as I have moved forward, because I appreciate that there were people thinking that you do have to take some time, and so that's what this whole thing is about. Okay, we got a few more minutes. Let's see. We have a lot of Auckland people. That's awesome. So Flavia Ramiz, somebody from Belarus who's in Wellington. Hello. Another person from Auckland. Thank you, Auckland, and even other parts of the world. I do appreciate that. I wish I knew how to say your name. So we're using something today called StreamYard to help us deal with questions and things like that. So feel free to just put your questions in the chat, and we'll be able to take them and throw them up so that other people can see your questions. And the way this will go is I will just give you a spiel of a lot of what I've done in the past year with a lot of folks. And so feel free to throw your questions in there. I will try to answer them as we go if it's possible. If not, I'll just save it towards the end. That's totally fine. The other thing, too, is after this, I'll jump over to our UXA Discord. And with that, we can actually go into a channel like this and just talk. I can answer more questions, or you can share some things as well, because you may not want to, for your security's sake, you may not want to share them generally in this YouTube channel, but it is a way to get to do that. And I'll hang out in the Discord for at least a half hour afterwards, and we can continue the conversation. But this is going to be mostly about Let's talk about your CVs and talk about your portfolios in the design world. Um, if you don't mind, though, I'm just going to get going. It's about 5 minutes, and if anybody else joins, they can just catch up with us. All right, cool. So I just want to talk a little bit about me first, so you kind of understand my point of view. Um, my tech journey started in California, where I am from, where I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. Um, I'll tell you, I never get tired of this view of the Golden Gate Bridge ever in my life. I think it's one of the most iconic and comforting places in the world that I feel that is home. But it is where I started my career as an actual developer, and even moving into a web developer. Um, but what happened is that it just seemed back in the 1.0 days of web, it was a little bit you could do whatever you want. And what happened is I moved into design, and I stayed in design for the past 20 years because it just fit who I was, who I am as a person. And I can say when I look at the world today, back to the world then, technology has definitely caught up to our imagination, if it's not surpassed our imagination. And my experiences have gone from being an interaction designer, which is what they called UXers back in the day. Yeah, it was interaction designers, because web designers did the visual design, did the branding design, and so there was a difference. But I did freelance, where I was doing quite a bit of work as a researcher, and I had to really learn how to do all this stuff. Um, and then I also worked in startup. I worked in consulting, and in doing so, you just gain a lot of these skills and a lot of these perspectives. Um, with that, then I had a life change. Um, I fell in love with somebody, and love's a powerful thing. Love for another person makes you change, makes different ideas, makes you have different decisions. And I basically packed up my life from California and said goodbye to my friends and family. And I moved to New Zealand because I fell in love with a wonderful man and I married him. And I've never regretted that. But I had to start all over. And I became an immigrant, and I think my story hits the same note that a lot of people in the tech industry in New Zealand, in Auckland, because I find that a lot of immigrants are working in the tech industry now, um, and I'm one of them. The thing that was pretty much the same is that I was a woman of color, and what I found in both places is that it was the immigrants who did a lot of the work, and it was the people who were from that country who were making a lot of the decisions. And that absolutely affected how, how I went through this life, right? So I wanted to give you that back. I wanted to give you that because when I started this journey of talking to people, and it was a lot of people. What happened is I just started mentoring just a few people in UXA, um, and then I signed up for something called the ADP list, and boom, I had a lot of people who wanted to talk to me, and particularly they were asking me about their CVs and asking me about their portfolios. And I was talking with people from all over the world, um, Israel, Germany, Colombia, I- um, India. In fact, this woman got up at 3 a.m. to talk to me in India, props to her. That was amazing. The US, Australia. So I was talking to a lot of different people, and I was talking about, sometimes it's about, work things, but quite a few of them were asking me lots of questions about their CVs and their portfolios. And whenever I talk to them, it's like, well, what are you doing? Like, what's bringing you there? What are the events that are making you make these decisions? And what I found is towards the end, I was sending out an email with this whole long list of things, and I thought, maybe I should do something about this. Maybe I should talk particularly about this particular thing about your CV and your portfolio. And there you go. Here we are now. We're going to talk about that today, right? So I always tell them when I'm talking to these individuals that there are kind of three things that I think you should think about and you should remember about your CV and about your portfolio. And that is, have empathy for the people who hire you. I know it's part of our bag of tricks, right? To empathize with the user. Well, they're the user in this case, and you will find that they need a lot of our empathy to actually see and go through all these things. But before I get into that, the other thing was to tell your story smartly. Tell your portfolio smartly. And then lastly, participate in your network. Participate in the community. I think those are the three key things. If you stopped right here and you said, okay, I got to go, if you took that away, I'd feel pretty happy about that, because I think those are the three things that will help shape your CV and your portfolio story, is if you kind of understand those things. With that said, with being empathetic to hiring people, and I say people because in some cases it's not just one person. It's actually a hiring manager that may work with recruiter. It may be a team. It may be somebody who's not even in design, who is making these decisions based on whether it's enterprise or startup or whatnot. But the chances are they're super uber busy. They are in meetings. They are working on projects. They are managing people. They are busy. And with that, if they're working, say, with a recruiter, they will get quite, depending on the role, they'll get quite a bit of uh, CVs and to look at, and then they have to wade through the ones that they want to look through, and they'll have reasons to look through them all, and which ones to look at and which ones to ignore. But they'll probably spend about 5 to 10 minutes on your information, and that's about it. And then they'll just go and move on. Um, Most of them, if I was to look at the types of age groups of who's in enterprise or who's in startup, I would be looking at Gen Xers and maybe older millennials um, in an enterprise situation, and I would probably see younger millennials and general Gen Z types are in more of the startup world, and that is based on what my experience has been and what I've seen in my career path. Okay. Um, but with that said, you probably want to make sure that what they're looking at about you is available on different form factors, right? They can see it on their laptop. They could see it on the tablet. They could see it on a mobile phone. I have probably told many of the people I talk to, I actually like to print out CVs. Not necessarily portfolios, but I like to print out the CVs because I rather go sit somewhere quietly with a cup of coffee and really look through them and not be one of those people on a thing looking at your information. But keep that in mind that those form factors are available, that those are how they're going to look at your stuff. So you want to make sure it works on them, right? And they're going to be looking at portfolios and looking at things that other people are also using. So how do you stand out among with these individuals? But recognize that They're super busy. They're not going to spend a lot of time on it. So whatever you're going to show it to them needs to be pretty spot on. Needs to be of a higher level, right? So with that said, let's talk about cover letters. Now, they may not tell you this, but if a job description says include a cover letter, that's the first test. Okay. That really is the first test. If you don't include a cover letter, then expect that they won't contact you. And it's kind of a lost art. I mean, I think cover letters are definitely quite from a time before where a letter of introduction actually meant something. But the way I look at it is write a cover letter. And if you're looking for quite a few different jobs, don't copy paste your cover letter because it's easy to make a mistake and not know everything, and they'll notice it. They'll notice when you send them a copy pasta type of cover letter. Um, One of the things to be mindful of is bad grammar, misspelled words. There are tools for that now that helps you deal with grammar. Grammarly is one of them. Google Documents are another. Bad grammar is the dictionary. I mean, there's a lot of tools to help you overcome this. Um, I would expect that you should use them. But what they probably want to see in a cover letter is that you did a little bit of research on the company. Um, you might write one or two paragraphs. That's about it. And if you know somebody in the company and they're the ones that told you, name drop them, put them in your cover letter, that will push you straight up, like, oh, I know that person. Boom. So if you know somebody, make sure you include them like, hey, I heard this from so and so, and this seems really interesting. And here's my information. And I look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you. Something really simple. And use an active tone. Use simple everyday language. Uh, don't try to be overly flowery. Don't be so descriptive because you can't assume that everybody on the hiring side that English is their first language. English might be their second language. So don't get fancy. Be pragmatic. Be simple, and just write a cover letter. Always write a cover letter. With that said, let's talk about CVs. Now, I found out, CVs or curriculum vitae, it actually means course of life in Latin. And resume, which is something you see a lot in the States, is actually French to sum it up. And who knew? Because I kind of like to say CV because it's just, it's two syllables versus resume, which is three. To me, they're the same thing. But the truth is, I've seen some real interesting CVs. I've seen some that have been 6 pages long, that had every detail of the work life, every education award, and they're just living up to what it means to be the course of your life, because that is what some people have done or had to do. Um, I've seen them with really long blocks of text. I've seen them with passive voice or bad grammar or misspelling. Do you see? Do you see? There's kind of a theme there that happens a lot with designers because um, we're meant to design, and I've met a lot of designers and developers. They're just not. Sometimes using words is hard. Um, But there's tools to help us overcome that, and so use those tools. But it happens a lot where you've might have seen some things that are misspelled. So always have somebody read your stuff, you know, and always see what other people are doing. But what I think is a really good CV and what I like to look at is short CVs, about 1 or 2 pages long. I actually like to see it as the sum it up, the top line of your work life. I don't need details. But you should talk about your work experience. You should talk about whether they're paid, volunteered, or if they're projects. Those are fine. You should definitely have your contact information. And in this day and age, I would just leave that to your phone number, your email. I wouldn't put your address down. That's something that's kind of old, I think. And that's out of safety more than anything. Um, put links to your portfolio straight up. Put links to anything that points to your visual, what you've done. Um, and be consistent with your verbiage, how you describe things. Um, list things out, put things in bullet points. Is it terrible? Describe things really simply. Add your skills and those experiences in your skills. Um, I say use emojis. I know what you're thinking, but I say make a visual language in your CV that they can just hone in on. And I have an example to show you later about that to see what it means. And also, I think you should mirror what you have in your CV to what you put on your LinkedIn. That's again another tool, but there are certain things, just have them consistent. I'll be honest with you, I don't know why we're sending CVs when I could just send my LinkedIn. But until the rest of the world has figured out how to be more simple, try to at least have the main parts of your CV and the main parts of your LinkedIn account. And yes, fill out your LinkedIn account. I definitely have talked to a few people that they did a great job with their CV and then kind of nothing with their LinkedIn account. And I think that you need to do both. All right. So that is that is it. Um, actually, there's an interesting conversation. There's an interesting thing I think I'm going to ask. Matt Sullivan, he says, I thought emojis come off as kind of unprofessional or overused. Thoughts? I have to say, part of this comes from that I work with a lot of young people and they emoji the hell out of everything. But what I have found is I think as a designer, there are ways that you can use, whether it's emojis or imagery, to create a visual blueprint, a visual way that they can read your CV from top down that you can reuse even in your portfolio so that you start to just like every product, right? You start to help the user imprint what those things mean. Um, so I suggest investigating if it works for you, right? If you may think that it works and you may think, maybe it's not for me. But I actually think some type of visual language, whether they be emojis or not, are actually quite good in your CV. So, and one thing that's really like think about it, using a phone emoji or a phone for your phone number, an email emoji for your email. They're reasonably useful in that case, and people get them right away. And when you see a page with just a lot of words, having those short bits of a pathway to follow that is of image is not a terrible idea. So investigate that, okay? Cool. Great question. All right. So let's move on to what I think they're looking for. Now, I think when somebody is no problem, Matt Sullivan. Thank you. What I think people are looking for when they say, "What are they looking for?" What are these hiring managers are looking for? I think they're looking for kind, curious, creative problem solvers who can use design techniques and leadership skills to communicate, explore ideas, and craft solutions. And now I know that's kind of a mouthful. And what I mean is that it's kind of the scope of what a designer is. When you look at designers and their skill sets, I mean, when I compare it to what a developer has to know and what a project manager has to know, or in the sense of the tools they use, they seem pretty much finite compared to the designer having to understand psychology and understand business and understand concept design and understand how to wireframe ideas and How does a person click on a button? It's massive. So when I look at some of these techniques that you have to look at and the leadership skills of conveying that technique or the importance or the outcomes from that, not being the leader of a bunch of people. We all have to lead. Um, as a designer, we always have to do those kind of things. So I think these are the things you have to think about. And you think about those things in your portfolio because your portfolio, um, it tells that story that describes your design work. It describes those aspects of you being curious, where you're those aspects of problem solving, those aspects of using kind of tools and skills to make a thing. It's your portfolio that expresses what that can be. So that's one of those things you have to think about is what's your story, Morning Glory. So you got to remember though, when you are telling a story, when you read stories, that you have to set a stage, right? You have to say who your client is. You have to say what the problem is you're trying to solve. You have to describe what your role is. You may want to add to that how long the project was. You want to talk about some of the actions that you had to do, right? You talk about what are the conflicts, what are the constraints, what are the things you have to, beyond solving of this thing, beyond designing this thing, you have to deal with these things as a way, um, as part of the story, and it causes that little bit of conflict that you will always see that you have to overcome, and that's what we like as humans when we talk about what is our story, right? You're also going to talk about what are your moments of insight. What what are the things you learned that made you pivot, made you make decisions, made you decide how to solve it or to apply it? Those, again, are really interesting to understand. And when you look at applying these solutions in the right part of the design, let's face it, right? We know about design system. We know about the double diamond, and we know about all these kind of things. And I think there's also the poop emoji or the poop thing where the beginning of a process is always pretty crazy, and then as you start to understand what's going on and you're coming to resolution, it evens out. At least that's how I think a lot of people in design think about that as well. But you want to focus on those things. You want to keep things short and sweet. You want to use bullet points. You want to, again, there's that idea of what emojis or a visual language can be to help the reader to hone in on the meaning of what that bit of information is, and use hierarchy. I mean, really look at your portfolio and the story that goes beyond it as a way to describe your work. Not everything, but the key things, the key things that make sense. And, you can do things in different ways. You can make images. You could maybe make a video vlog. I mean, it's a story, right? So, how do you want to express that? Can be done in different approaches as a designer, and I think that could help. That could help make you stand out. Again, in the sea of CVs, how do you want to stand out? So, let's talk about some of the portfolios that I see, and I'll tell you, the devil is in the details, especially when people are using websites, web services to showcase their portfolio. I'll have a few to show a little bit later. Um, some of the things that I've seen on some of these portfolios is just long blocks of poorly written text, very verbose, lots of misspellings, lots of bad grammar. Now, I know there's a theme there, and I'm going to tell you again that we are designers. We are people. I mean, let me tell this story. This one woman I used to work with, we were working on a project together and came up with a concept with something, and I actually filled in all the words. I actually just threw brain power and said, "This is what I think it should say." And the first thing she said, "But Nani, we're designers. We're not supposed to be writing." And my answer to her is like, "I know that's what they think it is, but we should have a point of view, and we should say what we think that message should be." And so I think there is this, and I've met some designers that have dyslexia. I've met a lot of designers where the writing is a challenge for them, and that's okay. There are tools that help you overcome that, whether they're tools or talking to people. But you have to write in your portfolio and you have to express those things the best you can. You have to pay attention to the details because this is what they're going to judge you on, right? If you cannot spell a word right or you cannot craft a sentence right, they're going to say, "Is this how they're going to be on my project?" That's why it's very important to just sweat that. Sweat it now, because once you get this solved, you don't necessarily have to do it again as to that level of detail. But again, use active, direct language. I have to say, for living, again, it's a side story, but when I moved from California to New Zealand, one of the things I had to really get used to is that if I asked a yes or no question, it might take a person 2 minutes to respond. It's this beautiful thing about New Zealanders that I do appreciate is they're just kind. Um, they want to present themselves in a way that they're not offensive. But that approach, that passivity, it takes a lot of patience for me to get through when I'm just asking a yes or no question. And it's the same thing when you look at your portfolio, is that you just want to be a active voice. You want to be direct. You want to give them a lot of the main details. You want to keep it short and sweet. You want to talk about those things as easy as you can, because when you add all that other stuff, it becomes a much bigger portfolio to look at. So that's why I say keep it short and sweet. Use active and direct language, because that works whether you are an English speaker or English is your second language. And I think that's important, to be that inclusive and show that in your portfolio. With that said, moving on, when they look at your portfolio, they want to know what you did, what lessons you learned, how did you work with others, how did the research that you did led to certain decisions, and then at the end of that, they want to look at the designs, right? They want to look at the visual content because you're a designer. But to get there, you can't just throw the designs and say, "Hey, man, doesn't that look great?" You actually have to do all these other things, because it's that leadership role of being a designer. Um, it's that part where you're making your case, because everybody thinks they can be a designer. Everybody has an idea what a color can be or what a logo should look like. But to actually say, um, "I think you need to use this button here and this Y," versus, a checkbox, which might be the easier thing for a developer to code. You have to use the communication skills, and that's really important. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. One of the things that I noticed when I talked to a lot of these different people is that they used a lot of different websites to, uh, show off their work. Um, and that's great. I mean, it's great that there are things out there now like Behance and Dribble to show some of your visual designs, because, again, they want to see the designs, right? But there's also, I found, there's Editor X, which I didn't know. I met a man that uses that. There's Squarespace, there's Webflow. I saw a lot of portfolio websites using Webflow. The thing is, when you use a lot of these websites and templates, they have a similarity to them. They make it so if I'm the hiring person looking at, you know, a bunch of CVs and a bunch of websites that look the same, again, there's a bit of this fatigue that could happen, especially if some of the websites, and they do happen, they may not allow you to link up, say, an image to something bigger, so you have to be mindful of that, that those things can happen. Some of these things are paid, some of these things are not paid, they're free. But you don't always have to just stick with these kind of templates and websites that could be overpowering. You can use other ways to describe your portfolio. Something as simple as Google Slides. Yep, Google Slides is not terrible, even a doc. It's pretty low on the visual things, but it's accessible and it's probably works well across different form factors. I saw a portfolio on Notions. I thought it was great. I know Notions is something I may use to keep track of my thoughts or collaborate with other people, but that person set it up to be their portfolio and it looks great, so that's another thing. Now I'm going to talk about Figma. I think there's some people who think you shouldn't use Figma to show your portfolio. I personally think you should use aspects of Figma for your portfolio. Um, the thing is, you want to be simple with it, right? So I think Adobe and Figma are great places that you could show. Not only are you using this design tool to show your portfolio, but I can actually take a look of how you crafted something, right? And I think that's important to me to see how well you do things. But other things you could do is Linktree. Other things you can do is just make your own, like be the unicorn. You may be designer, but hey, you can craft something up in HTML and CSS and JS, and that's pretty amazing. There are a lot of different ways that you can put your story into out there in the verse. So think about how you want to, be that creative to make that happen. Um, Adrian says, I use Instagram. Is that a good platform to show your work? Adrian, why not? I think you've actually jumped a little bit ahead, but that's totally cool. I do think there's things of social media that could help you do that. Um, Not including Instagram. It's just making sure that that is on your CV, right? You link to your Instagram. The thing is to think about with Instagram though is can you show a case study? Because that's what people are looking for, right? Is those case studies. So if you can do that in Instagram, great. If not, maybe couple your Instagram with say a LinkedIn post as a way to describe your story with words as well as with images. Does that make sense? Cool. Um, Martin says, what do you reckon about Google Slides or Figma for all three, cover letter, CV, and portfolio? Hmm. I'm going to hold that for later, okay, Martin? I'm going to just start that and hold that for later. But yeah, I might have something about that. All right. So let's talk about where you are in your career. So I did talk to people who had just finished school or early in their career and haven't yet gotten a job, and they were doing something else until they can still find that. And that's that happens. I found quite a few people who were switching careers. I already mentioned a young man that he was a developer. He did do project management, but he wanted to be a UX designer. But I met a lot of women, in particular, who started in graphic design and moved into UX design, which is seems very common. So career switching. I mean, I myself, I started as a developer. I have a career. I actually have a degree in computer science, but I've been a designer. I don't even know if I can develop anymore. But that's a lie. But the other thing is a mature career, and that can go on how you decide what to mature. It could be you've been doing that for 10 years, but if you started straight out of university, you're in your mid 30s. Or somebody like me who has been in the tech industry since 1994. So, mature career, we all have different things that go on in our life. And the thing that we don't also talk about is um, as you get older, as events happen in your life, like getting married, moving to a different country because you decide to get married, having children, taking care of your elder parents. There are a lot of these personal things that have a direct influence on what kind of job you may take, whether you'll freelance, whether you will. Um, um, stay at a job for a long time. When I was living in California, it was really clear and told actually to me by a few recruiters that staying 5 years in a job was too long, that they expected me to leave at year two to find something else. When I moved to New Zealand, I was meeting people who were still in their first job after 25 years, and I was blown away. One, that's great, but two, that's where I realized how different New Zealand was because that was something I would expect to see in America in the 80s, maybe the early 90s, but not here in New Zealand, in the aughts or the the 20 teens. I don't know what to call them, the 20 teens. But there was this difference here. And the thing is, when you're in a mature career, you've done a lot of stuff. You might have done a lot more than you can really show on your portfolio. So, what I often say is keep a little mystery. Pick the best things of all that you've done. Pick the things you're really proud of. Um, Look at the things that what you're trying to tell your story. Like if you're a career switching, just describe the direction of your career goals. I'm moving from this to UX. I've did this and I want to do research. So what are you doing? What are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you practicing? Because you may be experimenting. You may be doing things that um, is just showing that you're doing the work, and you want to include those things in your portfolio. But you don't want to have like 10 things in your portfolio, right? I actually tell people start with three and let those three things sell different aspects of your career life. Whether here's a project where I just did concept and I did just research, and these are the types of research that I did, or here's a project where I did the brand design, or I did the aesthetic part of the design and worked with a developer to create the front end of product. Here's a project where I was the mentor of a group, of a team. These different types of stories helps to describe a round future of what you are without, not every project needs to say the same thing in your portfolio. Use those different stories to describe those different aspects of who you are to work with. And these are the things that I think you should be, whether you're switching careers or you're maturing your year, to think about as you're describing those stories in your portfolio. Um, and that's what I was telling the different types of people that I was talking to, because I talked to all different. Um, I talked to somebody from each one of these cohorts. Um, and the one thing I think I've left off is immigrants. Now I'm an immigrant. I understand what that is. And being an immigrant where English is your second language and you're a designer, still a creative person, that can be a challenge to get your foot in the door. And I met quite a few people who were in that, uh, who 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 felt that, who felt the being a person who was different, who through a life decision, a life event, came here, and then not only settling in, but having to overcome all these things of being brand new and being whatever they were in their career, whether it was just starting out or being mature in their career, how to have those kind of conversations. That's probably the most I can say right now. But that's a thing. It's a real thing. Um, yeah. Okay. So then let's talk about research skills. So I've met people who are really good at research, and maybe they're not a visual designer. I think one of the things that we forget that people don't think about is as a designer in a product, right? A project designer, whatever, the skills up front where you are researching, where you are concept designing, where you're testing those things out, they tend to be wireframers. They may not have more of the aesthetic type of skills that comes from graphic design, where they can understand and make a brand, where they may be setting up their design for a style sheet and work with the front end developer to be able to do that part of the product, right? Um, and then there might be just people who are really good at um, maybe just the wireframing, just inkling these things out. And, you know, they might be the persons who does testing. Um, they might be the people who will do all the wireframes of this bigger concept. They might be the people who do more strategic design. But the thing is, when everybody says a designer, they're thinking you're all of that. And to be quite honest, that's not necessarily true. I know that I could say in my early career, I did everything to be the designer that could aesthetically design what the brand did and work with the developer to make that thing a real life thing on the internet, not knowing a lot of what research can be. And so that's why the next thing I decided was to find a job that allowed me to learn research skills. But I then moved into this is when I came to New Zealand as a specialist in UX. My opinions about visual design were not they were not, I don't want to say respected, but they were not taken into effect because I would gather data. Yeah, data, that does happen. And so because I wasn't as visual to them, they didn't want to, I don't know if I want to listen to you as well, or I'd rather listen to this other person who's more of a visual designer. The truth is, again, it goes to that skills, right? At each part of your career, you may do something different. You may start off doing the front end and you actually might know how to do HTML and you might know how to do CSS. Or you might be a person who's really just good at the research aspects. And does it mean that you will design? I actually met a woman. She goes, "Oh, no, I don't do any design. I just do this type of thing. And this is the stuff I really like. I don't want to do any of that." And that's all fine because she clearly said that and we could work with it, right? But the problem is, I find with research, is that it's a challenge, especially in your portfolio, to talk about the research because not all research is a deliverable. Research is done to gain information, to validate your concept, and to move to the next step. But it's hard as a tangible thing that you could stick into a portfolio to say, "Hey, this is the outcome of my research." I always find that can be like nobody wants to see my protocols that I use for usability testing. I mean, that is not like 7 pages of love that anybody will want to read, but another researcher who might go, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad you put that in there. I'm glad you organize your questions a certain way to ask certain information." It's a different part of your brain is when you're doing that. And so the challenge with researching skills is how do you show that in your portfolio? And I find the things that I can put in there that seem pretty reasonable are things that are information architecture examples, say a table that you might have in somebody's, the profile, something that has to deal with a table, say your mobile phone bill. How did you do the research to orchestrate what that looks like? A table is actually a really good example of research. Navigation, how you decided what the navigation is and how a person comes down that navigation, how they are organized, the parent pages and the children pages. That's a really good example of research. Um, Journey maps, customer journey maps, user flows, those are actually good example of research. What I think are not good examples of research is actually personas. Um, maybe I have like maybe I'm not feeling the persona. Maybe because I've done too many of them and I don't find them to be as useful. Where I think they're more useful is if you use it in your customer journey maps because it shows behavior and behavior change and what they're feeling, and I think that makes a lot more sense. So I wanted to point out for people who are research based, who are really into research, and you may have some, and I would actually like to see if you have some examples that those are things I think you could put into your portfolio really well. And because it is a design thing, um, you can see the impact of it in the product a lot easier than saying that you did a contextual inquiry or you did an expert review or what those things are. In fact, I met quite a few people who didn't know the difference between what qualitative and quantitative research is. I also have met people who may have taken some boot camps, which is totally fine, but they teach you like to make a persona. They might not teach you why you would use a persona or when's a good time to use them. So I always tell people to understand the difference between those types of research, qualitative and quantitative, know when to use them, why you would use them, um, what are good examples. I always send them to NNG because I think they're obviously primo at that. Um, to read their blogs and to understand those bits of the psychology of design, how we interact with machines, why we click on the button, you have to keep that up. You have to always keep reading those things or understanding those things. And then the thing that I think comes up, which is a challenge today, even, is performing user research ethically, performing, being able to set it up properly, being able to be respectful to the test participants and respectful to yourself, and to do things in a safe manner. I I again, this was another thing when I came from California to New Zealand that there was a lack of understanding of how to do that safely here. I know there's a few conversations where I was very emphatic of how to make that a safe approach, even though that's not what they wanted to do because it costs money to be safe. It's more expensive to send two researchers than one, and they always want to send one. And I fight for always making sure a minimum of two for safety for the researchers, but it's also safety for the person who's going to be intercepted and ask questions because they'll see, this might be a real thing because there's two people there instead of one. And you wouldn't believe how many times I have to like have a bit of a talk over that. So these is what I say about research skills. I think it's a real challenging one because it's really hard to talk about research and what its impact is in your portfolio story, when your portfolio story is telling all those things, the impact of research. And that's what they expect in UX and product designers, right? So the other thing I want to talk about is I see this in a lot about skills. Like I know Adobe, I know Figma, and then they may or may not say whether they're a beginner or intermediate or advanced. But I'm going to clearly kind of point out to you that this is what I expect. If you are saying you know how to use Figma, and I choose Figma after my career because I think it's pretty dope. But if you're a beginner and you're a grad, I kind of expect you at least know how to do layouts, components, tiles, know how to do vector graphics if possible, and know which plugins to use to make your work more effective. Um, I think even if you start using FigJam, which is their Miro killer, as I like to call it, um, you know how to do crazy eights, you know how to do user flows, you know how to do some of those research things as a beginner. But as you go up, as you get to intermediate, as you get to advanced, you should be able to do a lot more in that tool as you learn that tool. And that could be setting up libraries or components or making animations or making templates or creating design systems or being able to prototype test on your Figma file. Now, if you don't use Figma, say you use Sketch or you're using Adobe XD, you should still be able to prototype test on your prototype tests on those files to people as a senior, as a advanced user of those design tools. It's just one thing to say, yeah, I know Figma, but if you don't know those other aspects, how do I judge where you are and where do you fit in? And that's just, you know, that's my opinion. But the reason it's my opinion is because sometimes this is what I see. I have seen things like this, regardless whether it's a Figma or Adobe or Sketch. I see stuff like this all the time being hand off to developers, being hand off to other designers, or in somebody's portfolio. And what I want to see is something that's more like this, where you actually call things out, you have shapes. You actually might mirror the conversation that a developer would have when they create an HTML page. It starts with body, right? A person here can kind of see clearly, oh, here's my CSS. That's a subheadline. That's a copy text. This tells me this person has some pretty good skills. And even if you didn't name everything, even if you organized it like this, that would still tell me a lot more than this would. Now, the thing is, we all design like that. There's nothing wrong with it. When you're throwing it in, you're being creative, you're riffing through things, you got to move fast because your brain is moving that fast. But when you hand that over, when you move that to the next person, I want to see more of this because I think this shows me that I want to work with somebody like that. So that's just my pro tip on that. Okay. Um, Matt says, should you sell yourself as intermediate skilled? Is it better to leave off that word in case the hiring manager overlooks you because of it? That's an interesting question. It's a good question, especially since when you look at job descriptions, I mean, how many have not seen they want a beginning person who has like 2 years experience or 3 years experience, but that's considered a beginner, and that's not a beginner. I mean, that intermediate is really such a strange thing where um, you're being a little bit honest. Like this is where I think I am. I don't think there's anything wrong in your skills to say, like for example, I'll use mine. Like I would say when I put down my skills for wireframe, I'd put an expert, but if I said brand, I would put novice or I would put intermediate. It isn't that I couldn't do brand, it's just that I'm not as good as somebody who's actually a brand designer. And I had learned in my career that they would always be able to find a brand designer. They would not be able to find a UX designer. That was always more challenging. So I just put it in there, and I clearly articulate that to save face in the sense of they understand I'm being realistic about myself. I I think on the other side, and I have met people like this, where they have sold themselves off as something different. This actually brings me to my university professor who has a degree in philosophy, but he wanted to teach computer science. So he actually put in. He said he knew this thing. He didn't, but because he got the job at the end of June or something, or end of the school year. This is California, mind you. He had 3 months to teach himself how to do something, and he did. And that was just he was kind of that kind of guy. So I think, you know, when you are doing things like that, you're either trying to be saying yourself as intermediate skill is just being a bit honest about your situation, but you couple it with a goal like, but this is where I'm going to, and this is why, and this is what I'm doing to get to that advance. If you don't, right, it's kind of like my professor. Then you put in the work to make sure that when you get there to day one, you can meet those expectations. It really is time. Time to learn a thing, and it's also just being honest about yourself, and or how you see yourself. It's a story, right? It's a story of where you want to go in um, your next part of your career. I personally don't think it's terrible to show that little bit of humility and say, "Oh, I'm intermediate skill," but I wouldn't judge you negatively if you didn't, right? I am just somebody who could take a look at this and clearly make that judgment. So, um, that's why I say in your portfolio, if you are showing these things, clean it up. If you are passing things off to another person, clean it up. That's being a professional, whether you're intermediate or advanced or early in your career. That's not really the point. The point is this is more professional than this is as a designer. But this is something I've seen a lot all through my career. So it's just a reality of working of how we work. But if I was a hiring manager and I was seeing things like that, or like, oh, this person, we would have to train them to teach them to do it this way. Do I want to do that? I'm not sure. That goes in the other pile, the maybe pile. All right. Oh, there's actually more. Okay, so Matt asked another question. I think it's a good one. For example, I was told not to brand myself as a junior designer, even though that's technically what I am. Look, did they tell you why not to brand yourself as a junior designer? I personally, and I think some people will notice this that know me, I don't like to call people juniors. The reason is because it sets in motion already to other people who are not designers what you can and in whatever their brain is what a junior is. You can say other ways of describing that, but the truth of the matter is most job descriptions look for something really specific. If you can do those things, does it matter if you're junior or if you're not? I mean, I can wireframe. You can wireframe. I might be a little faster than you only because I might have experiences to make me that way. But you can still do the same thing. Labeling those things to where you're saying I'm a junior or I'm this. The problem is what is the audience and what do they identify what that word means and how will they treat you because of that. um, I know when I was leading and managing some designers, I one of the things with clients is we would get together with the clients and then we would describe ourselves and hi, my name is Haunani Pao and blah 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 blah. And what this person had done is hi, my name is so and so and I'm the junior designer. And of course, after the meeting, it says, please don't call yourself a junior designer anymore. Just say designer. Just say designer. That's good enough. I can say I am a senior designer. You can just say you're a designer. Let's just start at designer and move our way up from that. Um, You could say, I'm a designer with 25 years, or I'm a designer with 2 years. But maybe take those things out about junior and senior. Maybe take those things out when you describe yourself. Mostly because it's not what you feeling about yourself. It is what they think that word means that you are really want to overcome. Okay. I'm just going to keep on doing this. Sorry. One needs to be a little OCD to organize all the letters, but it's crucial, especially when working as a team on the same file. Thank you, Natura. Agree totally. Um, Thank you, Yana. Adrian writes, I've worked with corporate companies who does not allow you to show your work outside, or even if you are no longer working to them due to confidentiality agreement. Adrian, you know what you do? Take the design that you want to show and take all their information out. Lorem ipsum if you need to. Put something else in there. If you feel strongly that you want to show that, put it behind a password. They can't do anything unless they ask for the password, right? But the truth is, they can have the brand that they come up with, but the design, you can wireframe that out. You can give it different colors. You can call it the Adrian Ballet Show. There's not much they can do about that. But the other thing is, you don't want to show everything. You want to show the stuff that's really you're proud of and what's really good. So that's how I would approach that. I would say creating dummy design is advisable, but let's not call it dummy. I think it's not the best approach, but just, you know, call it a design system. Take the things you're really proud of, put it into a design system in Figma, and share that as part of your portfolio. That's more interesting than this is something that I did for somebody else. How's that? Cool. So the last bit I want to talk about is get involved with your community. I talked about, talking about being empathetic to the people who hire you, telling your story in a way that is approachable, but really it's getting involved in your community because, especially as an immigrant person, um, coming where you knew everybody who knew you to a place where nobody knows you, getting out there and reaching into communities to make is the most important thing you can do. I would say you may find jobs from the community more so than finding jobs from LinkedIn, because these are people who would know you. And this is where I find actually LinkedIn to be such a potential, just a tool, a great tool, because first of all, they've improved it. That's wonderful. But what about it is a social network just for professionals, and it allows you to follow companies that you're interested. Cough, cough, research, topics that you're interested, people that you're interested in. It allows you to do that really nicely and respectfully. You can attend events, you can attend hackathons, you can connect with people that you haven't met, especially in this COVID world. Virtual is pretty normal now. Um, it allows you to discuss things that you're interested in. Like some of these questions here, what if you put that in your post in LinkedIn and see what other people think about it and see what kind of drive that you would get from it? So that's why I say that it's great to use it for that. You can ask questions, you can share insights, you could be generous. You could be inclusive of other people from all over the world. It's really super great tool for that. And mostly to remember, be professional, be polite, be and participate. Again, it's the spectator thing, and there's a lot of people that just let it come in, but you need to participate. You need to show your interest. That will get somebody to be wanting to talk to you. Um, I would say do not treat it like Twitter. Do not treat it like your Facebook. It is your professional network, and give it that level of respect. But what I'd like to see you do is really fill it out. I know there's a few people that they had a great CV, but they barely did anything with their LinkedIn. And I would tell them, make sure to put the same amount of energy as you put in your CV, put it into your LinkedIn. Fill it out, put in your experiences. It has things for your projects, your side hustles, your volunteer projects. Fill them out. Use it to make professional friends and talk about the stuff that interests you. So I really support and tell people to really spend time making sure that their CV and their portfolio has something that's there on LinkedIn as well. I do think there's a future one day when they ask me something, I'm just going to give them my LinkedIn link and say, there you go, because it will link to everything else that I have. I think it's that useful as as a tool. And the other thing is to get involved with your community. And, I will go without saying that I think UXA is great, but there are other communities out there. There's communities in Wellington, in Christchurch, in Australia, in the world. They're not all in design. Some of them are developers, some of them are project managers, and that's great because you want to find allies in business and in tech. Because if they hear a job, they might tap you on the shoulder. Okay, so definitely use of volunteer in a community that helps you build those connections, but also build your communication skills. I mean, a lot of designers, they're very shy. Some of them are very introverted. Some of them, English again is their second language. Having that opportunity to practice makes it permanent. Practice makes it permanent. Um, so I encourage people to learn to grow their communication skills because they are involved with these communities, and that includes joining Discord, Slack groups. That includes just volunteering and things that you love. They cannot be tech, right? You might love or you feel very strongly about something that is nothing to do with the texting, and that is fine. Do something that is in a community that makes you feel good, but definitely reach out and participate. Don't spectate. And with that, where any the where your vulnerability wear your vulnerability proudly. Some of you have great hobbies. I met a man that very shy man actually who wanted to be a UX designer, and he's working on that. I talked to him about it, but I come to find out he's got great watercolor skills. And when I looked at his portfolio, I asked him, this is great. This is something I could see, but your watercolors are beautiful. Why don't you put that as the first thing that I see? Um, like really showcase the other things that you like to do, whether it's gaming, sailing, gardening, I mean, whatever. But you should give a little bit of those personal things that allows that hiring person to really think, hmm, I wonder what that person would be like on my team. I want them put them on the list to talk to. Um, you know, and you have to show a little bit more of that part of who you are. That's not just the technical, it's not just the design, it's not just the research, but hey, I'm a human that actually likes to take really beautiful pictures, or I like to play guitar, or whatever. I think those things are actually really good. Allow them to see the aspects of you that's clever and kind. And I think engaging in community is the way to do that. With that said, I want to show you a really nice CV. This is actually, I found this on Figma. Figma communities blows my mind. This to me is actually a great example of a design CV. It's all the things I was telling you about, right? It uses icons or emojis, but it's using a visual language to guide you. It's pretty concise. You can see here when you asked me about the skills, they didn't put down any of their skills, whether they were intermediate or advanced or anything, but they put down all their skills, what they thought was personal, what they thought was technical. Here's the emojis that show where to find his CV. I mean, his portfolio and his work experience, his cited projects, and even his achievements and hobbies and interests. This is a one-page CV, and It's out there on Figma for you to just download and play with and, take, some liberties of making it your own if it's something you like. That's a great way to do it. This is actually, a portfolio. Now I'm gonna be honest with you, it's a bit long. It's probably I'd love to see it cut in half, but this person has done a really great job of kind of guiding your eyes with a mixture of text as well as imagery. Um, the He gives all the main things of the story up front, and then he kind of guides as he brings you towards all the research and all the things that he went to the end product. um, I personally have played with his website. If you click on the image, it actually opens up. That is something that we have to get used to doing. Is maybe they call it progressive disclosure back in the day, but it's that ability to have just a high level things. You see that maybe in an FAQ actually, where you'll have all the questions and you click on it and there's the answer. Think of that as your portfolio where you have all the main bits and then they can click to see more. And that could be a Figma file, that could be um, this other file. So that's the way I would approach it. But this is what most case studies that some of the UX designers are doing right now. And here is actually something she had left with Miss Yana Brewster. It's about research people. When you do user testing, this is how I do my deliverables and how I recommend just top, like a, it's like an infographic because it's really hard to show user testing results because they're quite a bit to them. But if you could just bring it into one thing and say this is a summary, that's a great way to approach showing your story off in a way that they can give a look at. I'm like, this person might have something. I'll put them in the pile to talk to them even more. Um, so this comes to the end, and I have to say, like, I used to perform hula. That's like my little side thing. And my hula teacher used to say, as we're learning all the moves, that practice makes permanent. And it's true. When you practice your design skills in a way that talks about you, being empathetic to the hiring people, being telling your story and being extremely focused that everything works in your story, right? Keep a little mystery. Tell the things that you're really proud of. Um, and then get involved in your community, interacting with other people, whether it's virtual, which is the world right now, or face to face over a cup of coffee. I think those things help you find the job you want, hopefully. Um, and that's kind of the end of my talk. Um, So Zenya says there's so few jobs with less than 2+ years of experience. What would you recommend to do for those who don't have this experience like me? I hate to say it, but be like a man. Men don't care if they say something that says, they'll just throw their name in the hat. The truth of the matter is that you have to just try, right? You have to, it's an experiment. I remember one of my mentors telling me he used to tell me when he would interview, he goes, "I'm not interested in really moving, but I always interview because it helps me to practice." Um, it helps me to practice what I'm going to say or what's out there in the industry. So I think sometimes you just have to practice, right? And you have to put yourself out there. And if you remember, one of the things that I said, if you're early in your career, in fact, I will go back to it just to bring it back. If I remember where I put it. Oh, there it is. When you're early in your career, you know, it's okay. Say, look at LinkedIn and you've come up with an idea of LinkedIn and you decided to design it all out. You're not definitely going to send this to LinkedIn and say, "Hey, think of me." But what you are showing is you're doing the work, right? What you are showing is that things you're curious about and what you're tinkering about, it was enough for you to put it into something and say, "Hey, here's some of my experiments in my portfolio. These are the other things that I'm thinking about." That's still something that shows that you are a designer, right? That things interest you, that you're curious. So I would I would chalk it up that way as an experiment and to practice your craft because maybe you won't get that. And let's face it, some of these job descriptions, they're poorly written. They are. They talk about everything under the sun. They want somebody who has experience like me, but they want to pay them with experience like you. They're not always the best. So you have to look through those job descriptions and see which are the ones which are the things that they're looking for or they need to have for this role, and which are these descriptions that are just nice to haves, and be pragmatic about it. And if you're really interested in it, go for it. If you think you don't have the skills, find them on LinkedIn, follow them. If they have an event, attend the event. Talk to the people because what happens is that when they're showing a job or they're looking at things, they're going to remember you. Oh, I remember Zenya. She was talking about this. That was really cool. Oh, what does she write? What is she looking for? Hey, I know this person. Why don't you bring her in to talk or something like that? That's the community aspect that I'm talking about, right? So that's how I would approach it, if that makes sense. Martin says, after the final no comes, yes, that's true. Um, so I want to go back to this question that Martin asked, and that was, what do you reckon about Google Slides or Figma for all three, cover letter, CV, and portfolio? I think you saw that you could probably do that. That's not a problem. I think it's how you want to set that thing up. That means setting up the Figma file in a way that they can view it on those different form factors. So I think you saw that that question was probably answered. Anyway, is there any more questions? If so, do you guys want to? Um, I think the next thing I would say is, like I said, I would pop over to uh, Discord and we could just drop into the channel and just have more conversations. Other than that, any more questions before we sign off? I want to thank you for coming. And I want to thank you for some of the great questions that you asked. And I hope you walked away with this understanding that you have all the skills, you have it all. You just have to figure out how you want to tell your story. And you have to put yourself out there. You really need to. And that's a challenge. Look, it's a challenge. Um, but that's how. I think that's how you're going to find your next job or find something that's interesting to you is those three main things. Okay? All right. Then, if that's all good, I wish you guys a wonderful day and, um, just have just know that you're great and know that you can do what you want to do. It's just that simple. You just need time and put a little bit of effort and you'll get there in the end. And that's basically what I tell everybody that I coach is that they'll always get there. It's just a little bit of effort and time. It's really the main things. So with that said, I'm gonna just hop off and I'm gonna hang out. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody. Oh, I am happy to help you. It's really nice to see some people. Irene, lovely to see you, lady. I worked with her on something really um, earlier few months ago. Really lovely young woman. Um, but I wish you the best, folks. Bye.